Dr. Gore's bedtime story, Chapter 4 of the Enterprise of Death. The Three Apprentices of the Necromancer. He was, of course, a necromancer, although it was some time before his pupils learned that word, and of course he meant them ill. Well, that's a good start.
Yeah. Ow, 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 fuck. Sorry.
It's okay. They were trapped atop the mountain, and even though they had outrun their undead handlers, there were still matters of the chasm that boxed in that high and desolate spit of rock and ice, and the sheer cliff that fell away on one side of the prominence. They The atoll of stone where they were imprisoned cast its shadow over another lower island of rock and hard earth, and there the necromancer's semi-wild goats, sheep, and ibex pastured in the summer when the colour returned to the lichens and the grasses of the mountain. Semi-wild. They were his apprentices, whether they liked it or not. And of course, they did not. The chestnuts that they had found so delicious the first few days soon became disgusting as they ate little else. Be they roasted plain, ground into flour, or cooked with a little meal he granted them. Little meat he granted them. During the days, he had them beat at one another and the skeletons with sticks under the tutelage of a reanimated bandit chief who had escaped the cave and for a time held his own against the deathless then fateful night, before losing first his nose and then his life, and so was deemed a suitable fencing instructor. Wow, so that's what it takes.
Back then.
They erected a crude lean-to against a boulder as far away as possible from the necromancer's hut, without sleeping on the actual cliffside like swallows. The old man oversaw the construction and laughed at them for choosing the shrieking wind that raged along the precipice over his quieter company. And often he did not even allow them to stay in their meager shelter.
Oh.
On the nights he forced them into his hut, he taught them to read in the only book he had.
Oh, God.
And in that book, he only ever let them see the first page. Yet he could make the letters bend and warp and dance into new shapes and languages, and thus one page was enough.
Oh, okay.
Cool book.
Yeah.
The power is in the symbol, he told them one night after they'd eaten of the bandit's flesh. Kept cool year round in the snow of the glacier behind the hut.
Who needs fridges?
When you have bandit flesh. Before they had discovered the actual source of the meat, Omrose had told Halim that prohibitions against pork meant nothing to the damned, and even after they realized that he'd made them cannibals, they soon found that hunger goes worse than any god, and so they continued to eat the stringy lumps in their stew. What are we but symbols? Our flesh is merely an imperfect shadow cast by our spirits, what your imams call the soul. Our bodies are powerful because of the soul they symbolize, and with that power we can alter them, and we can alter the other symbols. Hallam had given up trying to unravel what the witch meant with his words and simply followed Omro's and Awa's lead as to when to nod and shake his head. The old man never singled him out with questions the way he did the young women, and Halim attributed that to his prayers he still sent east as often as he dared.
Yeah, that's why.
Yes, absolutely. Our found the sorcerer's ruminations cumbersome and often wrong. The spirits clearer than ever, there atop the world. Trafficking with the powers was something else entirely from the spirit infused charms coveted by her people. However, as she there we go, learned how to address the fire spirits that hid in the rocks, as well as the spirits of the stone themselves, she slowly plotted their escape. Ombros struggled with the concepts but appreciated the results. Her tutelage on the mountain was more formal than anything she'd learned as a child, and far more useful than hours of squeezing as if she was holding in her water to one day please a prick. Fair? The necromancer's exercises made her capable of altering little things to suit her purpose, made her able to bend what she thought was real to breaking point and then ease it back down once the world had given her what she wanted. Little things only, but she was beginning to appreciate the little things stacked up, and things that ought to be mundane became something more if she focused enough. The tongues of the bandit he had made them eat while concentrating on what the muscle paddle symbolized had taught them Spanish in as much time as it took to chew and swallow the tough meat. And she was confident that were she to eat the tongue of Halim or Awa, she would learn their savage native languages in the
I
same
would
short
totally eat
order.
tongues to learn languages.
Well, I mean that's going to bring up a whole new black market. Genius concept. Omro, said the necromancer, switching back and forth from Arabic to Spanish to get them used to the subtleties of their first fresh linguistic knowledge. What sort of symbols am I talking about? Everything is a symbol, Omro said quickly, her eyes darting to Owl for support. A former slave gave the slightest of nods, and Omro continued. The world is nothing but symbols, which is why I thought we were in hell when we came here. I thought we'd gone from one world to another, but only the symbols have changed. The world seemed changed because things I knew, seeing his sour expression, Omrose amended herself. Because things I thought I knew, like death being the end, had changed. How? Why? He demanded. You changed them, said Omrose. Because nothing in this world is true, and everything is a symbol. You can take what is true, what the symbol stands for, and you can change the symbol. You took the bones of the men who had come here before me and changed what they stood for, life instead of death. You took the truth behind the symbol of the men, their souls, and you put them back in their bones and changed their symbol and bah, Hour. Tell me plainly, girl. What do I mean by symbols? You mean different things at different times with the same words, but now you're talking of spirits. Our licked her lips uncomfortable under his gaze, even after all the long months on the mountain. And what is it we do when we change symbols, as your little friend calls it? Ombrose bristled to hear her flawless recitation of the words he had driven into her skull, used in such a childish manner. He was never satisfied with anything they did unless it made others look bad, her especially. She looked at Our, who stared past the necromancer and out of the dark window. You can't change spirits, Our decided, looking back at her tutor. You use words to make spirits and symbols sound the same, but they're not. When you say you're changing symbols, you mean you're controlling spirits and making them do what you want, which is not what they want. The spirits of the dead want to leave their old bones, but you draw them back and bind them and make them do what is not natural. So when you say you are changing symbols, you are making the spirits do unnatural things for you. Closer. How do we do this? Our shrugged. I asked them. You do you? The necromancer shook his head. Fascinating, the shape it takes. Make the fire hotter, Omrose. Omrose blinked and looked at the smouldering coals, focusing on the flames crawling up the back of the stone hearth. Her temples began to pound and sweat ran down her neck as she strained herself. She wanted the fire to grow badly. It hurt her throat and back. She felt the pinching in her bladder and bowels as she concentrated. Finally, a white jet of flame came hissing out the center of the blaze, a plume of heat warming the room in an instant, even as it died. And Omrose relaxed, her breathing coming hard and her body trembling.
Yeah.
Wow.
Nice.
Now you, Hour. Omrose saw him smiling at her old slave as she bit her pretty lip. Fury mingling with the nausea that focusing so intently had always brought on. Hour paused for a moment, then stood and went outside. She returned a moment later with a log from the woodpile and tossed it on the low fire. It flared up instantly, yellow flames dancing all over the dry timber. The necromancer brayed at this, clutching his sides as he laughed and laughed. And Omrose felt her eyes boil with embarrassment. The slave was always cheating. He always laughed, as though the ape had done something clever. She had told Arrow about making her look foolish, but this little black beast seemed not to care at all. It's not just the wood, Our told Omrose, recognizing the pained expression on her friend's face. You didn't hear because it was my spirit talking and not my mouth. But I asked all the logs if any were ready to join the wind, and he was. Then I asked the fire if she would burn especially hot if I gave her a log ready for her touch, and she said she would. And so it was very hot, hotter than just wood and fire. Don't listen to her, said the necromancer, mercurial in his praise as ever. He took a hawthorn box from a shelf and opened it to show them the half dozen brown stones inside. Bartering for higher powers, everything else will do as you say, if you follow Omro's example and make them. Take the salamander eggs. They only hatch in fire, but as their mother can't be expected to find a hearth out in the wild, they are born with innate knowledge of what fire truly is, and where the mother's and when the mother whispers the true word that all our human words for fire symbolize, the eggs flare up, igniting the nest she had built. And so the fire born of their own true selves warps the symbol of the wooden nest and Halim dozed in the warmth of the hut, waiting as patiently as a scorpion on a frog's back for his opportunity. As time had stretched over them, he had come to terms with the new road his life meandered down. He recognized that the necromancer had been hurt that first night, even if he had healed himself. And what could be hurt could be killed. Learning the letters was hard, and the witchery impossible, even had it been wanted. But he was outpacing Ombros an hour in the martial training, and he found where the skeletons kept their rusty swords, and took down to the low passes for their raids. Soon he would be good enough to kill the necromancer in one blow and escape with Omrose. And if the necromancer didn't die, then Hallim was confident he would at least be fast enough to spare his mistress any more pain and witchcraft. Hmm. This guy is definitely overconfident. The first winter on the mountain, the three Africans almost died a dozen times over. The necromancer begrudgingly allowing them to sleep on the floor of his hut after the third time he had to nurse Hallim's frostbitten feet back to health. The only method of restoring the blackened toes that the necromancer trimmed off and cast into the fire as the gang of skeletons held the wailing boy was to have Hallim eat the corresponding digits from the supply of bandit corpses which was dwindling. That winter waned slowly beside the glacier, and slower still when the necromancer chose the windiest, coldest, stormiest nights to amuse himself with his dead playthings.
Hello.
Hello,
Sorry about that.
that was fine. Okay, where was I? He would make the preserved bear corpse in the back of the room drop from its fearsome rearing posture on all fours, and as his disciples tried to sleep, he would cavort amorously atop its back with the rankest of his undead, the emaciated one that had brought in the bandit chief that first night, a personal favourite. Ombro's observation that this gnarled thing was female was slow in coming, and Hallam would have used these frequent occasions of the necromancer's distraction to attempt his murder had he been able to bring himself to look at the loathsome conjugal bed. For our the only thing more disturbing than the moans of the undead concubine were the
What?
nights.
Sorry. I think I missed a bit. That's okay, keep going.
Um, hold on. Here we go. Yeah, for our the only thing more disturbing than the moans of the undead concubine was the nights where she lay motionless and silent, a simple corpse mounted by the sweaty necromancer.
Oh my god.
Menashe finally arrived in all its cramping glory for our that spring. Slow in coming as good news, and she received a sharp rebuke from Omrose when she asked for some of the little linen that they had amongst them to bind herself. Understandably reluctant to request a precious cloth from her tutor, our finally broke down when a scrape of rough wool proved every bit as unbearable as she'd known it would be the first time she ran her hands over it. Rather than putting her through his usual undue unpleasantness, though he simply sniffed the air as she entered the hut and went to the rag basket, fishing out several scraps and tossing them to her. That's a different symbol, of course, he said as she picked up the cloth and winced, knowing it had gone too easily. Useful in all sorts of ways. Where are you? I'd postponed bearing a child for some time. Better to parley down the years. Babe fetch a high price to the right bidder, and none more than the firstborn.
Oh.
Hour fled the hut, shame blind as the necromancer cackled along with his concubine, whom he'd granted a tongue for the purpose of conversation, as well as less polite uses. Auer had once made the mistake of looking up when the necromancer gave an especially zesty grunt to find the husk of a man posed on all fours, like the more robust bear on which he rutted. The dead woman's face buried in a place Auer thought unfit for romance. Hiding in the lean-to, Auer wadded the cloth, uncomfortable in place under the leggings that the necromancer had taught them to knit from the wool he pulled through his rickety spindle. As soon as she finished, the bandit chiefs found her and led her to the dusty plateau for her daily training. Instead of sticks, she saw that Omros and Halim already held rust-reddened swords, and she silently took one for herself when the skeletal instructor offered it. The necromancer had repaired the bandit's broken bones and cleaned his flesh to help fill their larders. Unlike all the rest of his retreat from the sparring circle was accomplished by a cacophony of grinding and clicking.
Hmm.
The transition from chestnut staves that bruised skin and occasionally cracked bones to sharp metal that could kill in an instant altered the style of the training not a bit. Halin came on fierce as ever, Omrose beguiling in her feints and jabs, and our defensive to a fault. The bandit chief danced about them to add elements of constant distraction and to parry with the speed of the dead any blows that slipped through past their defenses. Even with his aid, they often ended their training early to carry someone to the necromancer's hut after a stab went too deep or a gash would not stop bleeding. By the time winter again loomed on the mountain, Omros and Halin each had stripes to match the old scars of Awa. Unlike her companions, Awa never screamed when the jagged metal tore through her flesh and dragged across her frame, leaving crimson wakes flecked with shavings of bone and rust. When should we try again? Our asked Omrose one frigid autumn night as the three huddled in their lean-to after the necromancer evaluated the light snowfall and told them they would not be allowed to sleep inside for another fortnight. I didn't know we'd already tried, said Omrose. Or is escape uh, escape what you call it when you get 1 foot down the cliff only to have the bowman pull us back up by our hair? I'm sorry for that, said Our, cheeks darkening. But I've thought of something better. If I distract the bonemen by trying to get over the glacier and down the far cliff, they'll follow. And if they leave a few behind, you've gotten good enough to stop them. During a recent sword session, Halim had smashed in the skull of one of the skeletons, and to his immense pleasure, it did not rise again. Our had further determined the nature of the creature's mortality, if their existence could be described in such terms. By focusing on decapitating her undead sparring partners, when she had finally succeeded that morning, it had simply picked its bony head off the dirt and reattached it, proving that the destruction of the skull itself was required to fell the monsters. So we get to try and fight our way out, said Omrose. That's an even better plan. I'll fight, said Hallam, perking up. You two go ahead, said Omrose, bundling her blankets around her. But I'm through being punished by him. We don't seem to be any more danger now than we were the first night. but Don't you worry about what he's planning, asked Our. No good can come of staying here. He's going to eat us, said Hallam, with a, a far longer chain of words than was normally wont to link. Fat, fattening us doesn't make sense, said Our. We've already eaten more than we'll ever put on, no matter how much he wants us to grow. He seems to like his bed companions seasoned, Ombro said. He probably wants a little more age on you and I before adding us to his collection.
Oh.
That's pretty grim.
Yeah.
Ombro smiled at the horrified expressions on Hour's face. Being young, pretty, vivacious had formerly been assets instead of detriments, incurring a keeper's favour. And though Ombros was in no way disappointed to be excluded from that particular arena of the necromancer's attentions, she found herself struggling with alternative methods of pleasing him. If you were not the favourite, you were a glorified servant to the favourite, and she would sooner hop on the bear and try a hand at changing his perceptions of living partners than be forced to dote on her own slaves.
Damn.
Or so she told herself when she was cross.
Wow.
That's well, that is a level.
Yeah.
Perhaps he's simply bored, and this is how he amuses himself, said Our, making her mistress flinch. Omos had recognized the familiar markings of ennui on the necromancer's gnarled face from the outset. The way his snotty eyes lit up when he provoked a reaction from his wards, the way he chortled to see them cry, that her rival now suspected the same could complicate Omrose's task, improving herself the most interesting pupil. The methods of allaying the necromancer's boredom might differ from the customary variety, at least for they at least for the living. But she'd done little but combat her own boredom in the harem, and knew many a diversion and a trick yet to be employed. Hmm. Bored? Omro sniffed at Our. Oh, yes, I'm sure that's why he teaches us his sorceries and everything else, and why he sends us out every day to spar with the bone men. Bored? Really, girl? What a stupid thing to say. Oh, said Our, wondering how she had scared her friends. Omrose only became nasty when she was frightened or upset, otherwise having thawed towards Our on the chill mountainside. Her former mistress might still eschew using her name instead of girl, but the tone of the word had warmed to Hour's ear, and she felt a rare heat on the coldest nights when Omrose would murmur, "Hold me, girl," and their prickly skin would touch. Just stupid, said Omrose. Don't you think, boy? Halim grunted his assent, amazed at ever at how they pretended everything was all right, how they played the little games. Omros knew instead of casting themselves over the cliffside, the first chance they got. Still, he would not abandon his duty, even in the hell he now inhabited, although truth be told, the times he slunk off to the cliff while the young women slept, he had felt a fear even worse than what the necromancer inspired in him, to see the moonlight glinting on the rocks far below. And even without the boneman watching him from the darkness, he would have balked. This was a test, he told himself, a test to be overcome through strength of will as well as arm. The glowering eunuch's the disapproval meant nothing to Aur, who pitied him no more than she pitied herself, and far less than she pitied Omrose. At least Omrose tried, which was more than could be said for Halem. If Aur were to be honest with herself, she would have admitted that she was relieved to have remained so unapproachable, lest Omrose turned to his thickier, warmer body when the wind pushed through the chinks in the stacked stones of their shelter. Quick in all her lessons, Aur had learned that if you're not the favorite, you sleep alone all of the time instead of most of it.
Oh,
I think I'm going to stop there tonight.
okay. Oh, that was a really